Hello, welcome you all again to the third session on a question on how 3D structures to be considered for 3D QSAR, because it's always a big question and debate. Of course, 3D QSAR is important, but from where and how the 3D structures to be considered. When you're doing any 2D QSAR, there is no bias. It's completely straightforward. But 3D structures, as your conformations or the geometry of the same chemical structure is going to change, your descriptors are going to change, your model parameters are also going to change. So let's today go through just 4 slides. Let's go through and see where we could get 3D structures, what all things we have to take care of it. I'm not going to talk about QSAR. There is a very detailed session on QSAR in my channel, including a demo and a discussion, but this is specifically to answer to this question. So myself, Giri, being working on computer aided drug designing for a while. So where could we get the 3D structures? The 3D structures you can get from existing 2D structures or smiles. You can draw structures in 2D and convert them to 3D using softwares or algorithms or tools, whatever you call it. And then you can get 3D structures even from X-ray structures, the crystal structures, and you can access from CSD, that is Cambridge Structural Database of the small molecules. Even there are other structural crystallographic databases, mostly paid, including CSD. And there is another one called as COD, Crystallographic Open Database. There also you can get. It's mostly of inorganic, but even organic molecules are also present in COD database, which is especially taken from literature. So CSD, COD can be considered. Then 3D structures from conformational analysis. That's also there, where you can use tools like Balloon, and Avogadro has the functionality. In most of the cases they use MMFF force field for conformation generation. And finally, we can take 3D poses from docking results when you go for biological activity and relating with your binding affinity. So that's where you want a biologically complex, stable 3D conformation of your ligand or the compound for calculating 3D descriptors. Now let's go through some of the aspects to dig down where these 3D structures come from. You can use molecular mechanics like MM1, MM2, even MMX in PC model, where you can generate optimized 3D structures, even molecular dynamics, then dreading minimization, then ab initio methods like density functional theory or Hartree-Fock, or even you can go for semi-empirical methods like parameterizations like AM1, PM6 and others. And then you can also get it from conformational sampling, understanding which is the best global minima or local minima, but we always go for global minima, and then pick up the conformations. Pharmacophore, of course, for pharmacophore also you generate conformations, but you end up with a pharmacophore which might or the conformation which is similar to your reference molecule. So that is also a 3D geometry. Then if it is related to binding affinity or biological activity, we talk about 3D poses from your docking. It's not that for a single structure you have to take multiple poses, analyze, understand, just not with docking score, but with considering other parameters, and then you have to choose a pose and then calculate the descriptors. Then directly from X-ray 3D structures or crystallographic open databases or Cambridge structural databases, and otherwise transition states. I have done a few publications around 3-4 years back using transition state, derived descriptors, and then able to model it I just used only 2 descriptors and we got very good reliable model. And coming to what kind of 3D descriptors we have quantum chemical, electronic, hydrophobic, pharmacophore, steric, van der Waals, electrostatic, polarizability, molecular field analysis, which is like COMFA, then molecular similarity indices like COMSIA, then topological distances, then partial positive surface area and partial negative surface area, TPSA, solvent accessible surface area, moment of inertia, WIM index, then radius of gyration, ionization potential, thermodynamic properties, homo-lumo properties, and many more. So these all comes into the 3D descriptors. If your 3D structure is not proper and you calculate these descriptors, this is going to drastically change what you're trying to predict or come up with a QSAR model. So of course a lot of information there in 3D structure, but your starting structure you need to know from where you got and how it is relating to your activity or property that you have chosen. So in my next slide I'll tell you some of the scenarios about how we consider these different kinds of 3D structures from different sources. Moving forward, there are other descriptors like derived 3D descriptors from other calculations. As I mentioned earlier, when I did a transition state calculation for calculating relative abundance or cyclization, I was able to calculate the distance between nitrogen and the carbon where the cyclization could happen. And that is a manually calculated descriptor, not automated. So that particular descriptor and the Balaban index, only these 2 descriptors are being used for the model. And the distance descriptor itself had around 84% of correlation with the relative abundance. So that is what we have to look at. Significance, signs of relevance. We want descriptors which is more significant and which can be more related and correlated to your activity or property that you're going to model. It's not just you have to look after the statistical parameter. Now the distance, so what I'm trying to say here, the distance is if the distance between nitrogen and carbon is lesser or on the cyclization, I mean transition state, these are the possible formation of a bond and the cyclization happens. So it was again a peptidomimetic, so we want to see which number of cycle, which member, like 11 membered or 8 membered or 7 membered of amino acids is going to give you a much more stable cyclization. That was the analysis. So, and also you can have experimental values as descriptors. It's not necessary that only the calculated values to be your descriptors. And other descriptors could be like fingerprints and many more others are available, which I will be covering up molecular descriptors in a separate session. Today we are focusing only on 3D descriptors. So this is what I was telling you. On which type or kind of property or activity you are considering for modeling, that's how you have to choose your 3D structure. Let's say biological activity. When you say biological activity, if you have a protein structure with you, it's better you take the 3D geometry from a docked complex. Of course, validate it as per the docking and then choose the best pose and bring it to the descriptor calculating software. Ensure that you further do not optimize it so that you retain the 3D structure which is in the docked complex. Let's say you don't have protein, right? But you just have activity. Let's imagine one of the reported activity reference is already a crystal structure is available. So you can get the co-crystal structure and then you can do pharmacophore screening against your molecules. So when you do that, you will be also getting a 3D conformer, which is pharmacophore mapping is being done based on conformation analysis, and you can pick up that particular 3D structure and retain them while you're calculating the descriptors. Now when you're going for physical and chemical properties, physical means a physical property of that particular compound or a chemical property of that specific compound, you need not to look at a docked situation. as it is, a compound as it is. So for those two cases, the best is to get the X-ray crystal structure. I understand for most of the structures you might not be having. Those who have reported only, it will be available in CSD or COD databases. If you don't have, then you have to at least do Hartree-Fock or DFT based calculations. Nowadays, I don't think that many of you will be having limited resources of hardware. At least you will be having i5, I think, or at least you will have 4 GB of RAM. That's fair enough for you to do a Hartree-Fock or a semi-empirical calculations. So don't try to automate things. We always, the QSAR is being made bad, the models are made bad just because of we wanted to automate everything and make it feel easy actually. So when you're calculating or modeling a QSAR for physical or chemical property, ensure that your starting structure should be good one, and ensure that they are converged and optimized. Both are different. So when you do DFT, there is convergence criteria as well as optimization criteria. So these have to be met. That's where you're very close to the X-ray structure. I don't say exact, but at least very close to X-ray structure. So then only you try to calculate the physical and chemical. Now when you say use certain, I don't want to name the software. When you use some softwares, of course they use MMF or MM2 based parameterization for optimizing the 3D geometry. To be honest, they are not so close to X-ray structures. So you could check reviews and online that which of the methodologies are closer with accuracy to the X-ray structure or not. And I don't say that X-ray structure is the most accurate anyway. Even NMR is there and other methods available. Then again, when you're coming to pharmacokinetic properties, you have to still look at a stable conformation, for example, where it is metabolically stable, a prodrug strategy, again quantum chemical calculations. Now you might think, sir, how can we do that for 500 molecules, 1000 molecules? Of course, when you're looking for a very global or a diverse set of models, you have to do it. Here, the objective is not to model. The objective is get a better, accurate model which is reproducible. It's not simply model. So you have to take the pain. Materials property. Materials property, most of the time it will be some interfacial energies, or when your molecule is going to interact with some surface or some different material, what is a change in the property that is happening. So those things to be considered when you go for materials properties and nano particles or nanowires and others. Coming to toxicity, you have to understand the knowledge base, which region of the compound is prone to be toxic and others are not. So you need to have a thorough understanding about that and selecting the key descriptors and other property or activity that whatever you're trying to do. Earlier days when I was in University of Florida, we had a project from Johnson & Johnson which is related to mixture modeling. So we couldn't use 3D descriptors in mixture modeling because mostly we use 2D descriptors. 3D descriptors possible, I don't say no, but we couldn't rely on those data, whatever we got out of from the model. So you have to take a good care when you are trying to take or consider the 3D geometries. The source of 3D data, of course you can use 2D and 3D databases available like PubChem, Chembo, Molport, eMolecules, NME and many more, ChemDiff and many more. BindingDB is a good source again, Cambridge Structural Database or even Crystallographic Open Database, best pose from your docking studies, the best conformer, the best pharmacophore. So what do you mean by the best and what is the best? You have to have a thorough understanding about respective field. I'm not going to cover that today. Converged and fully optimized structures from DFTs or semi-empirical calculations. And finally, let the structure come from anywhere, any source, or let it be auto-curated but please check all the structures one by one. Very trivial. There could be mistakes in the structures. When you're coming to descriptor calculations, you, as per the property that you're doing, you have to retain the geometry or not, you have to decide. If you're taking it from a docking program and calculating using a different program for descriptors, you have to retain the 3D geometry. If the descriptor calculating software is going to again optimize, then geometry might change, the values might change. So you have to retain the 3D geometry. So for example, in Padel, you have an option whether to retain the 3D geometry. If you do not want to retain, it will optimize, and there are two options for you to optimize, either MMF F94 force field based or MM2 for parameterization. And so they can generate 3D and then calculate the descriptors. And do not simply generate descriptors, thousands of descriptors. Try to generate relevant descriptors. Be selective, because initially if you don't understand which are the descriptors I am looking for my specific property, finally you end up with thousands of descriptors, and then you give the challenge to machine learning and statistical and genetic algorithm for feature selection, and there's a lot of bias, lot of models being generated. Now you have to play around with numbers there. So rather, why can't we select relevant descriptors which is specifically correlates with our property or activity? Of course, based on reading, I'm not talking based on any quantitative numbers. And then, so rather calculating thousands of descriptors, try to pick up the specific descriptors and calculate them so that your model will be more significantly meaningful. And then direct and derived descriptors. See, when you see some of the tools providing 3000 descriptors, 1800 descriptors, if you sit and look what are the main descriptors, there might be only 180 or 60 or 70 descriptors, max 200 or 220 descriptors. And when the same main descriptors, when they say 1800 or 3000, it is all derived descriptors. So from the same descriptor, there will be different fraction, partial, indices or something like that, many fractions and many derived descriptors. So you have to make sure that what is the significance of the derived from the direct descriptors, how it is going to correlate with my activity. So most of the time the main direct calculated descriptors will be the key descriptors for your model. Sometimes these derived also, but you need to be very careful in selecting them, because you need to have an understanding of physical meaning and what is it has a relevance with the activity or property. Then the reliability, because if you are predicting a value, you are calculating a value, what is the reliability of that prediction? Is there any error value? Is there any standard deviation? Of course we cannot predict that. To some extent yes, if it is a model based, but if it is a descriptor calculation using like softwares, DFT or molecular mechanics or semi-empirical, we don't see that. Of course we can calculate the error when you have zero error calculations in DFT, we can do that. But then again, a reliability is something that you have to take care by looking at the structures. Now you might also think, why not 1D, 2D and others? Of course you can do, but today we were more focusing on 3D, because it's always a bit challenging when you use 3D structures and the descriptors, you might not end up with the desired model. So that's why it is very important how you consider the 3D data of the structures for the modeling is very important. So some of my views and opinions, please understand the existing knowledge limitations, and tutorials are just how to do, but not about what to take care. So we should take care of all the data and its relevance and others. There should be a good relationship between property, activity and descriptors. If you cannot relate between property, activity and descriptors just with the statistical parameters, it is going to be a little bit difficult on designing new molecules. So physical significance and meaning of descriptors are very important in order for you to write the story. Because when you write QSAR, it's not about equation, it's not about only about statistics parameter, it's about what is the take home message from these kinds of descriptors that you're going to correlate. And we have to pick up the relevant descriptors, but not simply thousands of descriptors. Avoid duplicates, and also consider to avoid intercorrelated descriptors. So within the descriptors itself, there will be correlation, maybe greater than 95%, 80%. So we have to see which one to be removed, which to be retained, all those things to be taken care. Check the reliability of the data used. What I mean that is not with the structure. When with the structure you have corresponding micromolar or millimolar or nanomolar, those kinds of data will be available. Sometimes you take log, and earlier paper they already would have taken a log. So those data reliability should have been checked. So if you are not considering all these parameters, it's something called as GIGO. GIGO is garbage in, garbage out. So we have to be very beware and be very careful with this data. So finally, that's all from me for now, and next topics we will be covering is how to choose PDB for docking and the role of molecular descriptors in general for QSAR. So, and I would like to thank members in different forum discussions and contributors, mentors, students, and all their feedback.